Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison. This is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana. We have a jam-packed show today, a lot of basketball to talk about today. We're going to open the show with the Indiana Pacers. We're going to talk about how they've clinched home court advantage for the first round of the playoffs. We're going to talk about the landscape of the East and the road to the finals for Indiana. We're going to talk about the Final Four, which wrapped up just this past Monday. We're going to sort of close the chapter of this 2024-25 college basketball season. We're going to do our top 5+1 for the NBA, MLB, and NHL. And then we're going to start to talk about the Western Conference. We're going to get into sort of who's coming out of the wild, wild West, because it is very much a wild, wild West. And then we'll close the show talking about the Indianapolis Colts and sort of the composition of their roster heading into the draft and the rest of free agency. Let's talk about the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers are great, but the rest of the Eastern Conference is too, and the rest of the Eastern Conference is very, very good at the top. The Indiana Pacers are, without a doubt, awesome, right? They're probably going to be the 4 seed. They're technically a game behind the Knicks with 2 games left to go. It is feasible that the Pacers overtake the New York Knicks. I don't think it'll happen. The Knicks close the year with the Nets in the last game of the regular season on Sunday. The Pacers play the Cavs and the Magic. The Cavs are resting starters. They totally could win both. The Knicks play the Cavs and the Nets. Of course, the Cavs resting starters. So I imagine that both teams have a pretty good chance of finishing the year 2-0, and the Knicks would grab the 3 seed. But regardless, the Indiana Pacers are awesome. They're probably going to be the 4 seed. They could be the 3. They will have home court advantage for the first round of the playoffs. They have legitimate star power with Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam. They have a wide variety of possible scorers, a very deep bench. They have playoff experience. They made the Eastern Conference Finals just last season. The Pacers will be a threat to go deep in the postseason. Indiana, absolutely. Awesome group, awesome team, awesome franchise. Definitely has a chance to go far in the Eastern Conference playoffs and potentially even further than that. But I don't want us to forget about the strength of the East. I think a lot of times Pacers fans can kind of, and I've caught myself in this feeling a bit recently in the last few weeks, where the Pacers keep winning, right? They're 20-9 since the trade deadline. They have one of the best records of 2025. They are, of course, the 4th best team in the East in terms of record, and that includes a very, very sluggish start to the season. So the Pacers have been playing like one of the best teams in the East and one of the best teams in the entire NBA. And sometimes we get caught up in that feeling of saying the Indiana Pacers are a sleeper, they're a dark horse. They should be almost expected to win multiple rounds in the playoffs. And while I understand that idea, keep in mind that Cleveland and Boston still exist, and even New York, keep in mind that they still exist. I want to shed light on the strengths of primarily Cleveland and Boston at the very top of the East as the playoffs loom, and kind of preview the path to the NBA Finals that this hopeful 4 seed in the Indiana Pacers is potentially going to have to navigate through. More than likely, Indiana is going to have to play and knock out both in a 7-game series, Cleveland and Boston, without home court advantage, and that's just to make the NBA Finals. It is impossibly difficult to win a championship in most sports, but the NBA is absolutely one, because once you get to the playoffs, it's 7-game series. And Indiana, who would be the underdog against Cleveland or Boston, no matter what, of course, is going to have to win a 7-game series, most likely against both of them before even getting to the NBA Finals. So my point is that this season is not a failure for Indiana under most circumstances, right? If the Pacers win a first-round series, this season is exactly what we would want it to be, right? Obviously, we want the Pacers to win a championship. Obviously, we want them to sort of improve upon their Eastern Conference Finals appearance, and of course, 4-1 loss to the Celtics just last season. But in my opinion, when you look at Indiana, you see a team that is in a small market, right, in Indiana. And as much as Indiana's a great basketball state, it's a small market relative to Boston, right, or LA, or New York, somewhere like that. Obviously, Cleveland is too. This is an Indiana team with a roster that's capable of winning games in the playoffs, capable of winning series in the playoffs. But as far as getting to a championship and winning it goes, it's a bit more of a long shot as a team like Indiana. So I don't want myself and us fans to sort of get caught up in the idea that Indiana is expected to go all the way or expected to win multiple rounds, make the Eastern Conference Finals, win the Eastern Conference Finals, and things of that nature. Because, again, this is a 4 seed. This is a team that I think is great. I think is fantastic. I think is perfectly capable. But if there's a loss to the Cavs or the Celtics, and if it's a 4-1 loss, 4-2, even a sweep loss, That's not a failure, in my opinion, right? This Indiana team has been great in winning a first-round series, or even a close loss to someone like the Bucks or the Pistons. I think would be totally acceptable as well. I want to be very clear. I still have very high hopes for the Pacers. I still absolutely believe they can win a championship, absolutely believe they can get very close. And at any point, if the Pacers advance, pass around, beat anybody in the East or anybody on the other side of the West once we get to the finals as well, I wouldn't be surprised, right? Pacers absolutely capable of winning it all. I just want it to be clear that if things fall flat in the playoffs, if there's a conference semifinals exit in a series that wasn't particularly close, I don't think that's a failure, right? I still think the Pacers have been great. And I want to shed light on the other teams in the East, right? I want to clarify that Cleveland's awesome and Boston's awesome, and it's going to be very, very difficult to, first of all, advance to the point where the Pacers can play one of those teams and then actually win those series, potentially back-to-back to make the NBA Finals. Let's start with the Cleveland Cavaliers. They are the strongest point of the Eastern Conference. They are the strength at the top, number one seed, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Indiana just took on Cleveland last night. I'm recording this on Friday morning. It's 11:41 a.m. on Friday, April 11th. So the Pacers just knocked off the Cavaliers the night before. It was 114 to 112, and the Cavaliers were resting 4 of their 5 starters. Jared Allen was the only one that played. So Darius Garland's out, right? Donovan Mitchell out, Max Strus out, Evan Mobley out. Cavaliers really weren't playing anybody, and their bench had a great performance on the road against the Pacers inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse. The Cavs are deep. They have a very well-structured roster as well. I love the way the Cavs are built. You have 2 premier guards, you have 2 premier big men, and then a 5th man on the floor, which a lot of times is Max Strus, sometimes it's Ty Jerome. Guys like that where at all times, there's a fresh shooter, there's a fresh pair of legs out there at all times as that 5th guy to sort of jumpstart the offense if they need it. And on top of that, you have Donovan Mitchell who can take over games. You have Darius Garland, who's a very strong, second score option in Cleveland, and you have the 2 bigs down low that work very well together in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. I really like the way the Cavs are built. I think they're deep. I think they're great. I think that top to bottom, the Cleveland Cavaliers are potentially the best team in the league, certainly, obviously, the best or at least top 2 in the East. This could get tricky, right? If it's shaping up to where the Pacers would be the 4 seed and they'd have to play Cleveland in the second round most likely, and that would be tricky. I would certainly be concerned. Now, obviously, the Pacers are 2-1 against the Cavs on the year. They split in games that mattered, games that I would argue counted, because the Cavs hadn't locked up the 1 seed yet. They still had things to play for, right? They were still playing their starters. The Pacers split on national television in those games just a couple months ago, and that was very impressive from Indiana. But still, in a 7-game series when the Cavs would have home court advantage, that would be tricky, and I think the Cavs are built very well. I think they're very deep, and I think that was showcased last night in Indiana. The Cleveland Cavaliers, absolutely. Despite being a small market team, they don't have LeBron James anymore. Despite being a team that sort of is a little bit more up and coming, we haven't seen them prove it in the playoffs yet to this point. The Cavaliers are awesome, and I think they're going to prove it in the playoffs. And then the 2 seed is just casually the defending champion Boston Celtics. Indiana is 2-1 against the Celtics on the year, but they've been playing their best basketball recently. Now, I understand the fact that the Pacers have as well, but the Celtics have won 17 of 20. They've been unreal. Jason Tatum is underrated as a star, in my opinion. I don't love Jason Tatum, but I do appreciate his greatness, and I think that the fact that he more or less led his team to the NBA Finals and a championship last year is kind of overshadowed and kind of undermined, perhaps, partially because of, the way he acted after they won. I totally understand the deterrence from that, perhaps, that fans may feel. But Jason Tatum, he's a great star. I think people forget about the Celtics. I don't like the Celtics. Nobody likes the Celtics, right? Nobody wants to see them succeed. They won a championship last year. It's a major market franchise. It's a franchise that's won a lot. A group that's been dominant for a while. The faces of the team haven't been the most lovable, right? This version of Jason Tatum, that version of Kyrie Irving when he was there, right? Al Horford. No one loves the Celtics, right? If you're not a Celtics fan, and a lot of people hate the Celtics, and I think that Jason Tatum being the figurehead of that also contributes to the fact that the Celtics are really underrated, in my opinion. I think that they're not being talked about enough nationally as a title contender as the 2 seed. The 2 seed in the East being the defending champion Boston Celtics that have won 17 out of their last 20 and have been absolutely unreal. And by the way, one of those losses was by 20 to the Magic the other night, but the Celtics were resting their starters because they wrapped up the 2 seed. So really 17 of 19 was that run for the Celtics. They have been unbeatable for over a month, right? The Boston Celtics are playing their best basketball. And yes, the Pacers are 2-1 against this team, but they played them much earlier in the year. The Celtics are going to be great. Jason Tatum is going to be great. Donovan Mitchell is going to be great. If that is the Eastern Conference Finals, it's going to be an absolute thrill. And it seems that the odds are stacked in their favor for that to be the case, not just because they're the 1 and 2 seed, but also because of the rest factor, right? Cleveland and Boston have been playing their best basketball and will be playing their best basketball in the playoffs after having multiple days and weeks of rest. The Cavs and Celtics are both resting their starters right now at the end of the regular season. And once they get to the playoffs and things ramp up, you have to keep in mind that the play-in teams in the East are much worse than the play-in teams in the West, right? I believe everybody in the play-in in the East has a losing record. And I do like Orlando. I do like what they've been doing. But if Boston takes on Orlando, right, that series probably wraps up pretty quickly, especially Cleveland versus Atlanta or Miami or Chicago, whoever comes out of the bottom half of that play-in, the bottom bracket, the losers bracket, whatever you want to call it, Cleveland's going to win very quickly. So in theory, right, you see Cleveland win very quickly and have multiple more days of rest. Boston wins very quickly, has multiple additional days of rest. And Indiana in a 4-5 series against Milwaukee or against Detroit, that absolutely could go wire to wire to Game 7 once again. And then you see another Indiana team have to battle through a hard-fought series and then set up against a team that's had a lot of rest. That was fine against the Knicks last year. But by the time Indiana went over to play the Celtics, and although they were playing well and although they had plenty of momentum, this is an Indiana team that has just battled through 14 games against the Bucks and the Knicks and had to pull off 2 Game 7 upset victories on the road. And now you have to go play the Boston Celtics, the number 1 team in the East and ultimately the NBA champions. That was very difficult for the Pacers, and I expect that to be very difficult again, especially when you keep in mind that, in my opinion, the Cavs and Celtics, right? If this is who Indiana has to play, if they're the 4 seed and they have to play the Cavs and the Celtics, back to back in the conference semifinals and the conference finals, I think that pairing is more difficult than having to play the Knicks and the Celtics from last year. That's just my opinion. I think that this year the top 2 in the East is stronger than last year's top 2 in the East, and obviously the Celtics were awesome, and obviously the Knicks were great too. But I think that this Eastern Conference is the top of this Eastern Conference is stronger than it was last season, and the Pacers would have to barrel through both the 1 seed and the 2 seed, most likely. Obviously, there's no guarantee that the Celtics get through on the other side of the bracket. I think they will. I don't know who's going to beat them in a 7-game series until they get to the conference finals. If it's Pacers versus Cavs, even if the Pacers squeak through and pull off the upset, then they're faced with Boston in the conference finals, and then they're faced with whoever wins the West in the NBA finals. The East, like I said, is very, very good. Now, Indiana is certainly capable. They're 20-9 since the deadline, right? They've been awesome in 2025. They've been awesome since the trade deadline, despite not making any moves, right? Indiana has the 6th best record in the NBA since the trade deadline. They are, without a doubt, a title contender. They're a team that could win multiple series in the playoffs. They're a team that could go all the way as well, in my opinion. But it's worth noting that the rest of the Eastern Conference and the top of the Eastern Conference is still very, very good. Like I said, Indiana, 20-9. They have the 6th best record in the NBA since the trade deadline. You look at that and you say, how are people not talking about Indiana? I agree. However, Boston has the 2nd best record since the deadline. Cleveland has the 4th best record since the deadline. Don't sleep on the Cavs or Celtics. Don't overlook the Cavs or Celtics. Don't ignore the strength of the East because, as I'm saying, the Eastern Conference is incredible, and I am certainly concerned. I am fearful for the Indiana Pacers as they stare down potentially the Cavs and the Celtics in the next couple series here moving forward. Obviously, they first have to get past their first-round matchup. That will probably be the Bucks. It could be the Pistons. We'll see if Damian Lillard is in the lineup for the Bucks when we get to that point in the year. But either way, the Eastern Conference is awesome. Indiana is too, but it would be a tough road to the NBA Finals for the Pacers as they get past Cleveland and Boston, and I don't want this season to be viewed as a failure if they fail to do so. good segment about the Pacers. We're going to move on and we're going to talk about college basketball, the Final Four. This year's Final Four was a picture-perfect representation of the beauty of sports. We had 4 1 seeds. We had 3 thrilling games in the semifinals and, of course, the national championship. And the national champion ultimately absolutely earned it. I don't mind a lack of upsets in college basketball if we get a finish like this, right? If this is the way the NCAA tournament is going to wind to a close, then I don't mind the fact that there's not a lot of upsets. And that kind of plays to the larger narrative that we're kind of seeing across the country, the idea that NIL and the transfer portal is ruining the fun of the NCAA tournament, ruining the thrill of March Madness, right? Because when you allow players to be paid, right, obviously the biggest brands and some of the strongest programs are going to be the ones that are going to be the most capable of dishing out large sums of money. And when you allow players to move freely in between seasons to get themselves to those larger programs, it makes sense that the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, Gonzaga, some of these powerhouse programs are going to mop up a lot of the talent. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen. And as a result, some of those hidden gems at schools like Iona, right? Walter Clayton Jr., he came from Iona. Schools like Iona or Florida Gulf Coast or Loyola Chicago, the hidden gems and the talent on those rosters is swept up by the larger schools anyway, and those smaller schools don't rip off upset wins at quite the same rate that we've seen in the past. Obviously, Colorado State was probably the most fun upset story in this tournament, right? They, of course, get the win in the first round over Memphis, and then they go ahead and lose to Maryland on that buzzer beater from Derek Queen, but they nearly made the Sweet 16. Arkansas was really the best upset story, but that doesn't count because it's John Calipari and it's Arkansas. It's an SEC program. Sure, they were a double-digit seed. They made the Sweet 16, but it's Arkansas. It's John Calipari. It's the SEC. If they didn't play in the SEC, they probably would have been a much higher seed than they were. So that's sort of the narrative that we're seeing thrown around across the country, is the idea that March Madness isn't fun anymore because of NIL and the transfer portal, and because we have all 1 seed Final Fours, only 1 double-digit seed in the Sweet 16. And I understand that argument entirely. But this 3 days, 3 games of basketball between Florida, Auburn, Houston, and Duke was, without a doubt, the most fun I've ever had watching college basketball, probably in my life. And I just mean from a quality of basketball standpoint, when it mattered most in the Final Four, that was an absolute thrill. It is well worth it. If the first couple weekends are sacrificed perhaps for this Final Four year after year, I understand the trade-off. I understand the fear of giving up what is fun with some of those upsets, and I'm not sure. We don't have enough of a sample size to know that NIL and transfer portal is moving us away from these upsets and these fun first and second weekends. But the Final Four is awesome, and I want more of that, right? I want more 1 seeds in the Final Four. It doesn't have to be 1 seeds, but just I want the best teams in the Final Four, absolutely. And we got that this year, and it was an incredible experience. Again, I don't mind a lack of upsets if that means we get a finish like this. So let's go over some storylines from the Final Four. It obviously was a great time. Florida won it all, and I enjoyed that. I didn't really care going into the tournament if Florida won it all. I sort of spoke a couple episodes ago about how, in my opinion, almost any of the 1 or 2 seeds, if they won the championship, I would be thrilled, right? I would be very happy for Bruce Pearl. I would have been very happy for Tom Izzo. I would have been very happy for St. John's and that story. I would have been very happy for Kelvin Sampson. That's a great example. I would think that Duke and Cooper Flagg, that would be a fun story. That'd be interesting. I would be okay with that, right? When you go down the list of 1 and 2 seeds, most of them I would have been elated if they won a championship. Obviously, at the end of the day, Purdue fan, want Purdue to win it all. But outside of them, really anybody, I would have been ecstatic to see win a championship, at least amongst those teams sort of at the top. And Florida was not on that list for me because they won back-to-back championships recently, right? In my lifetime, they've won back-to-back championships. It's a program that hasn't really been through as many trials and tribulations in the tournament. They haven't been through as much heartbreak in the tournament as of late. Auburn obviously had that devastating Final Four loss in 2019 to Virginia. Houston has had their hearts ripped out a time or two. Tom Izzo, I'd love to see him get another championship before he's done coaching at Michigan State. There's a lot of storylines across the board that I think have been built up over time, whether it is those coaches in Tom Izzo or Bruce Pearl or Kelvin Sampson, or whether it's a program that certainly deserves it. And I wouldn't argue that Florida fits that category because they won back-to-back championships in my lifetime, whereas some of these schools, of course, have never won a championship, and some of these schools, of course, have taken the long road to get here. And it felt like Florida sort of took the fast track. And I understand that there's way more that goes into this, but Todd Golden, a young coach, right? Florida, a group that put together the right transfers and really built a program and a team that was going to be awesome in the SEC and awesome in college basketball, and all the credit to them for that. But I didn't necessarily put Florida in my category of teams that I would have been thrilled to see win it all. But that kind of changed throughout the tournament just by watching how awesome Walter Clayton Jr. was game after game. He put together masterclass performances game after game, and we saw that primarily against Auburn in the Final Four. And then, of course, at the end of the game against Houston, he kind of finally came alive after a very cold shooting day and hit the shots in clutch time to put Florida over the hump. That was, of course, not all that contributed to their championship victory in that final game, but it certainly helped, right? And seeing Walter Clayton Jr. sort of have that performance was thrilling throughout the tournament. It was thrilling in the Final Four against Auburn, and it was thrilling in the championship late in that game against Houston. I was really happy for Walter Clayton Jr. I was really happy for Florida by the end of it. Still, Kelvin Sampson, he's my guy. I would love to see him win. I don't know if he'll get another chance to, and we'll get to that in a second. But Florida, I think, has an opportunity to become the next villain of college basketball, and specifically Todd Golden. It's still Dan Hurley, right? He won back-to-back championships. He's a polarizing personality. There's plenty of big bad villains in college basketball history. But I think Florida has a chance to be the next one. And if this program continues to have success, and if this coach and Todd Golden continues to have success, if you look at his figure, if you look at his face on the sideline, you see a young guy knocking off these older coaches, right? Bruce Puller's been doing this for a long time. Kelvin Sampson has been doing this for a long time. They both very much deserve championships. The way they've built their programs, the way they've found success at Auburn and Houston, those guys deserve championships. And Todd Golden does too, but he's on the younger side, right? He's under 40 years old, if I'm not mistaken, right? He's a guy at Florida that maybe built his program and put it together a bit quicker than Bruce Pearl and Kelvin Sampson did. It hasn't been as much of a long, enduring, sad road many times as, of course, these seasons come to a close for these teams. And Florida won it all. And Todd Golden won them all. And you see his body language, his cold face, his young self on the sideline winning championships over older coaches that potentially deserve it more. And I think that contributes to the idea that he could be the next villain in college basketball. If Florida continues to be successful, if UConn's reign is over, right, and it may not be, they could bounce back, absolutely. But if UConn's fallen by the wayside a bit, and so is Dan Hurley along with it, Todd Golden could be the next one. And that, personally, I think would be amazing for college basketball. College basketball is sort of known to be about, in my opinion, the faces of college sports are the coaches rather than the players, because the roster turnover is so much more consistent, right? In the NFL, you could have Tom Brady lead the Patriots and be the face of the Patriots for many, many years. Aaron Rodgers with the Packers, Peyton Manning, right, with the Colts or the Broncos. It's the players that really carry over from year to year. Whereas in college, especially in this era where players are bouncing around everywhere, when you look at the figurehead, the face of a program, and the faces of the sport, you look at the head coaches, right? Bruce Pearl is Auburn, right? Janai Broome obviously represents Auburn in his own way, but Bruce Pearl is such an overarching figure with Auburn, where when you think of Auburn basketball, you think Bruce Pearl instantly. If you think Packers football, you think Jordan Love, right? It's a different world in college, where I would say that the coaches are sort of the primary narrative drivers and the primary composition of the storylines. It has to do with the coaches. So Todd Golden being a villainous coach that just won a championship at Florida, that's potentially going to reload and continue to succeed in the SEC the next season, that would be awesome for college basketball. The same way I think that Dan Hurley and his polarizing personality, I think it's awesome for college basketball. I think some of these older, more experienced coaches that are looking for one more championship or their first championship, Bruce Pearl, Kelvin Sampson, Tom Izzo, I think it's great for college basketball. I think that the quality of coaching in college basketball right now is very, very good for the sport. And Todd Golden has now put himself in that mix, right? He's been to put himself in that conversation as one of the better coaches in college basketball. The difference between him and the rest is that he's on the younger side. So I love that Todd Golden obviously found this success, and he found found a way to win, right, at the end of the day. The SEC tournament champion ended up winning the whole thing, and I think that's very telling in terms of the current landscape of college basketball. Florida was the 2 seed heading in, the second best record in the SEC heading into the tournament. They won the SEC tournament, then they won the NCAA tournament. That makes a lot of sense, and they earned it, right, throughout the regular season and the conference tournament, playing in the SEC, and then going through this NCAA tournament run. And this, I feel, is very important because, again, this is a group that was battle-tested throughout the regular season. They were battle-tested throughout the SEC tournament. They just kept winning in the SEC tournament and then into the NCAA tournament. And then they had one of the more difficult roads to a Final Four and roads to a championship. This is not an easy slate. This is a series of games where most one seeds would be very much in danger of dropping a loss at least once throughout this tournament. They played UConn in the second round, the defending champions. That is very difficult. They played the number 1 overall seed in the Final Four. They had Maryland in between, right? And Texas Tech, of course, a difficult matchup as well. And then they had to play Houston in the championship. So to win the national championship, where on the way you have to knock off the defending back-to-back champions in UConn and then the number 1 overall seed in Auburn, the only team with a better conference record than you throughout the regular season, that is already very impressive. And then they go ahead and knock off Maryland and Texas Tech in between, followed up with Houston in the championship game, and Florida's your national champion. They earned it, absolutely. It's partially because there's all 1 seeds in the Final Four, right? No matter what, you have to win 2 games against very quality opponents. And even on top of that, UConn, Maryland, Texas Tech, it was a very difficult road for Florida. All these teams had difficult roads to the Final Four, but the fact that Florida won the way they did week after week, time after time, was incredibly impressive to me, and I was very excited to see that from the Florida Gators across the board. On the other side of that championship game is, of course, Houston, with the fumble quite literally on that final possession of a lifetime. I was shocked that they didn't get a shot off. I was shocked that they turned the ball over so thoroughly towards the end of that game. And what's a bit depressing about this to me is that this is a senior-heavy roster, right? This might be Kelvin Sampson's last run. I don't know if he will ever get over the hump and win a championship. It is incredibly difficult to get this far in the NCAA tournament. In my opinion, is that if you're making the Final Four, if you're going to make the national championship game especially, you have to win it, right? You have to win it. And as a Purdue fan, that's what I saw this past season, where despite the fact that UConn was incredible and going to be a very difficult team to beat, Purdue may never get a better chance to win their first title than they did last season. And Houston's very similar, right? Kelvin Sampson has built this Houston program up from the ground, and putting them in position to be in a national championship game and potentially win it is obviously very impressive. He may not get another chance because this core of players, they're leaving very soon, right? And he's obviously on the older side. This probably was his best chance to win a championship. It doesn't mean that he won't, and it doesn't mean that he can't in the future. But if he does, again, this was his best chance right here. And seeing him lose in that fashion was very difficult to watch. The part that made it a little bit less heartbreaking was just my personal opinion that Houston was playing with house money. They obviously put together that 11-1 run to beat Duke at the end of the national semifinal game. That was very impressive and obviously very difficult to do. And obviously credit goes to Houston, but I didn't feel like Houston was going to be in the championship game for most of that game, right? I didn't think they were winning for the majority of that game. And so when they did, it felt a bit surreal, and it felt like Houston shouldn't really be here. And that was also parlayed by the fact that getting past Purdue in the Sweet 16 was a little bit tricky, right? Buzzer beater at the end. Houston was tested throughout the tournament. They were put on the ropes multiple times, especially in that Duke game, of course. They pulled out the victory and then sold the victory back away to Florida to win the championship, and that obviously is devastating. But it felt like Houston was playing with house money. As much as I love their style of play on defense and as much as I love LJ Cryer, it felt like they were playing with house money, and it would have, even though it wouldn't be a Mickey Mouse championship, it would have felt like a Mickey Mouse championship at the end of it, at least to me. So Houston, I don't know if Kelvin Sampson will ever actually get over the hump, and that is a really fascinating storyline to watch over the next few years because I absolutely believe that he deserves it. Auburn is a similar story. Will Bruce Pearl ever win it all? Will he ever get over the hump? I think that his program is more built to last than Houston's is in the short-term future. But Auburn, man, if they never get it done, that would be depressing. They've made the Final Four twice in the last 6 years, lost in the Final Four both times in very close games at the end of it. Of course, lost to Virginia and Kyle Guy. Now the loss to Walter Clayton Jr. and Florida, and then Duke. Just a terrifying, horrifying way to end the season, a terrifying, horrifying way for Cooper Flagg to end potentially his college career. If it ends here, it's marred by despair, and the question of whether or not they would have beaten Florida popped into my head right away. When I saw the way Houston handled the last couple minutes of that game, the thought of, again, what would have happened if this was Duke? If Walter Clayton Jr. is that cold shooting the ball throughout the first half and most of the second, I don't know if there's a world where Duke doesn't manage to triumph over the Gators. I still think Florida obviously deserved a championship because they won it. I think that Florida would have had a great chance, even in the front court, at battling Cooper Flagg. But Duke, man, if they don't blow that lead at the end of that game against Houston, I think Duke absolutely has a chance to be a national champion. And we're having a completely different conversation about John Shire. We're having a completely different conversation about Cooper Flagg. We're having a totally different conversation about Walter Clayton Jr. and Todd Golden in Florida, right? Kelvin Sampson even. It's a totally different storyline if Duke doesn't blow that lead. And there's a lot of outcomes in the world where Duke doesn't blow that lead. They probably would have beaten Florida. Their inexperience really shined through, but the difficulty with Duke is their inexperience shined through in that Final Four game in crunch time there, but they don't really have time to wait to get older, right? Con Knippel's going to the NBA, more than likely. Cooper Flagg also more than likely going to the NBA. It's a different team next year, right? So it's not like they have this experience to bounce back from because most of these key players, they're leaving by the time we get to next season, which obviously is within their own right. But it's a difficult situation for Duke where they had a great team. They may not have a better team. They may not have a better player on this team for many years in the future as Cooper Flagg hits the NBA. But this Duke team losing felt like the Zion team losing, where you know you have the number one pick in the draft on your team. You know you have a great supporting cast around them, and they just couldn't get over the hump and get it done, right? At the end of the day, despite great recruiting classes, despite a great roster, great coaching staff, right? They just couldn't, at the end of the day, win the championship. And I think the Duke championship drought is a very fascinating storyline as well because they couldn't do it with Zion, and they couldn't do it with Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg's probably gone. Who's the next star player on Duke that we probably don't even know the name of that's going to lead them to a championship? I really don't know, right? It's been a while for Duke, and this was probably their best chance to win it all. Obviously they didn't, and that's devastating. But across the board, right? This Final Four gave us everything. It gave us NBA talent. It gave us great shooting. It gave us great defense. It gave us come-from-behind victories, right? Games that went down to the wire. This is what happens when the cream rises to the top, and I find that absolutely thrilling. I could not be happier about it. Duke, Houston, Auburn, and Florida, they gave us a masterclass Final Four. Florida won it all. Of course, props to them. I had a great time, and if this is what the NCAA tournament is going to look like in the final couple days of it, moving through the future years, I feel fantastic, and I cannot wait to see what's next season. All right, I want to introduce a new segment. We're calling it a Top 5 Plus 1. This is something that I want to do in the middle of every show, right around the 30-minute mark. I want to do my top 5 power rankings for all of the major leagues that are playing games right now. So currently we're going to talk about the NBA, the MLB, and the NHL. We'll get the WNBA in a couple weeks. We'll get the NFL eventually, college football, right? But I wanted the top 5 plus 1. Now, the top 5 is just a top 5 power ranking. The plus 1 is not necessarily a number 6 or a first team out. It's more of just a team that I find interesting, a team that I find compelling or maybe it's a team that's on a win streak. Maybe it is just straight up the 6th best team. Maybe it's a team on a win streak. Maybe it's just a team that I find compelling or interesting, a team to watch, right? If you're going to watch games in the NBA, MLB, NHL, makes sense to watch the top 5 teams. And then I'm going to give you another one that I think is important to keep your eye on throughout the rest of the week. We'll start with the NBA. It's the last weekend of the regular season. Some teams are resting their starters. Most playoff teams have clinched. All play-in teams have clinched their spots as play-in teams that will, of course, play starting April 15th. So here's the top 5. At number 1, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder. They clinched home court advantage throughout the Western Conference playoffs and, of course, the NBA Finals. They closed the year with Utah and New Orleans. That should be 2 wins. They'll win more than 65 games on the year, which I think is very impressive. This is a young team. They're fun. They're electric. OKC absolutely deserves to be in the mix as an NBA Finals contender despite their inexperience. They're the number 1 team in the NBA right now, in my opinion. Number 2 is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, I almost put Boston here, and obviously we talked earlier on the show about how great Cleveland and Boston are. I didn't put Boston just because of, honestly, recency bias. I watched the Cavaliers bench nearly knock out the Pacers on the road last night. The Cavs are the best in the East. They're unbelievably deep. They have a strong starting 5. I love what the Cavaliers are doing. I obviously spoke on them earlier in the episode, so we won't spend too much time on them now. But the Cavs are awesome, right? And they're number 2. The Celtics, number 3 as well. You can't forget about them. They play Charlotte at home twice. They're the defending champions. They have a ton of momentum. By the end of the year, even though they're resting starters, they'll probably have won 19 of their last 22 and then have to play a play-in team in the East, and we know that those teams aren't necessarily very impressive in the 7-10 range. Celtics look great. I love what I'm seeing from the Celtics. They're an NBA championship contender to go back-to-back. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens at all. They might even be my number 1 favorite team to go win it all, is the Boston Celtics, and there's certainly an argument for that, and I'm willing to make a video on that, to do a segment on that in the show in the next couple of weeks. But the Celtics are awesome. They're at number 3. Number 4 is the Los Angeles Lakers. They split with the Thunder, and then they won in Luka's return to Dallas. That's their past 3 games. Very eventful. They have star power. They have playoff prowess, right? They have consistency in a wild, wild West, which is very important. LeBron, very consistent night after night. Luka, less consistent, but his ceiling is very high. And you know that Reese is going to have good nights, or you know that Rui Hachimura is going to have a good night. Jackson Hayes, right, is strong there in the center. I think the Lakers are great. I think they're, in terms of power rankings, probably the number 2 team in the West. But honestly, in terms of likelihood to make the finals, they might be the number 1 team in the West. They might be the team that I think is most capable of winning the Western Conference by the time we get to the end of it. The Indiana Pacers are at 5. It's a tough call at 5. There is some homerism here, but they've won 6 in a row. They have not lost yet in April. They will have home court advantage in the playoffs, at least the first round. They'll be a streaky upset play. They'll be fun and interesting. This is a team that's going to be tough to knock out, right? They play fast. They really wear out opponents. Great shooters. They have star power. They have a great bench. This Indiana really does have everything that you want from a team that could potentially make a run in the postseason. That's why they're at number 5. And then the +1 in the NBA is the LA Clippers. Kawhi came back, and the Clippers have just been incredible. They also have 6 straight victories. They have no losses in the month of April. The West is absolutely ridiculous. And the Clippers could accidentally end up being a 4 seed. I was convinced that they were going to be the 8 a while back, but the Clippers, it seems to me that they're probably going to avoid the play-in. And with how bonkers the West has been, with Memphis and Denver both firing their coaches, it's not unthinkable to suggest that the Clippers play the Grizzlies or if they play the Nuggets round 1. That's a very favorable matchup for whoever gets either one of those teams. It'd be really funny if they played each other, but that's a story for another time. Clippers absolutely could win a series in the first round. And then by the time you get to the second round, it's still really messy, because if you see the Thunder get upset by somebody like the Timberwolves, right, that could totally happen. And even then, the Thunder, young, inexperienced team in the conference semifinals, they lost to a 4 seed the year prior. The Clippers could accidentally go on a run of the playoffs, and I would not be shocked if that happened at all. So they're the +1 for the NBA today. And before we close out the NBA section of this segment, don't forget about Houston, right? The Rockets are great as well. I love the Rockets. I don't really believe in them in the playoffs. I think they're too young. I don't think that I think they're a star away. I think if you throw Giannis Antetokounmpo on the Rockets, they win a championship, and they certainly win the West. But maybe not certainly, but they have a very strong chance to win the West. But I don't know. The Rockets might be the weakest 2 seed I've seen in recent years. Maybe since that Memphis team, when Ja and Desmond Bane were at their youngest, right, up and coming a few years ago, 2021, 2020, whenever that was. Houston's a weak 2 seed. I could see them losing round 1, absolutely, if they play somebody like Minnesota, right? If they play a strong 7 seed, no doubt Houston could lose. And Minnesota probably will be that opponent in the 7 hole, if I'm being honest. Or Golden State, very difficult. So the Clippers, I think that they absolutely have an opportunity to potentially to squeak through. And I honestly believe in the Clippers more than I do the Rockets. Houston, I think, is an unstable 2 seed. I think they're prone to being upset. I don't think they'll be in the Western Conference Finals. They will lose at some point before then. The West is crazy. The East is top heavy. Either way, there's a lot of great teams and a lot of great playoff basketball to be played, and this will be a whole lot of fun in the NBA. Let's talk about the NHL. I don't know a lot about hockey, to be honest. I'm not that smart with hockey. I haven't watched enough hockey in my life, but I'm learning, right? And we're ramping up towards the playoffs, and Ovechkin, congratulations, just surpassed Wayne Gretzky for the all-time goal-scoring record, right? There's a lot of fun stuff going on in hockey as the playoffs sort of approach, as we approach the playoffs. My top 5 is a little bit interesting in the NHL. Again, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm not fully qualified to do a top 5 plus 1 in the NHL, but I'm going to, because I'm kind of trying to start to integrate myself into the hockey world. The Washington Capitals are at number 1 for me. Winnipeg has more points, but Washington just set the new record with Ovechkin, right? So Washington, just because of that, just because I think that Washington is great, and I think that we're on a crash course for Washington-Winnipeg in the Stanley Cup Finals, which would be a thrill. But Washington's the best in the East. I'd love to see another Ovechkin ring. Otherwise, you kind of start to establish a narrative that maybe Alex Ovechkin is another Aaron Rodgers, right? Somebody that won a ring, I wouldn't say early in their career, but won one ring and then played many years after that and never really got back or never really won it again. And I think that Ovechkin could be that. I would love to see that not be the case. I would love to see him win again with Washington. I think they have a great chance to do so, and I have them at number 1 in the NHL right now. Winnipeg is number 2 for me. They just shut out the Stars. They're looking like the best team in the league. Again, potentially a crash course for them versus Washington. I would love to see that. Toronto, the Maple Leafs are at 3. I like Toronto a lot. I feel bad for them, obviously, in their playoff history, but I like Toronto. I'll put them at 3. They're going to be the best team in the Atlantic. They are going to steal it in the final month from the Florida Panthers, defending champions. I like Toronto. I would really like to see them succeed. I have them at number 3. Number 4 and 5, I have 2 sneaky Western Conference upset plays. I have the Dallas Stars and the Vegas Golden Knights. The Stars have struggled recently, but I think they're great. I have them at 4. I think the Golden Knights also have an opportunity to potentially upset the Winnipeg Jets in the West. They are in the top 5 as well. And then my plus 1 in the NHL is the Edmonton Oilers. I watched the Oilers beat the Blues in the final 20 seconds the other night. And I think this team is slept on. Sure, they're the 3rd best team in their division, right? They'll play the Kings, most likely, in the first round. They haven't technically clinched the playoffs yet, I don't even think. But the Oilers, they'll be in. They'll be the 3 seed. And I believe the Pacific is their division. I'm not entirely sure. But the Oilers, they're injured right now. They just got Connor McDavid back, and then they beat the Blues 4-3, and with a 19-second goal, with a goal with 19 seconds left in the third period, rather, by Connor McDavid. I think this team is slept on because they're so injured, because they're sort of hanging back lower in the standings. Edmonton could go on a run. They're my favorite plus 1 team in the NHL. They obviously lost in Game 7 last year in the Stanley Cup Finals. Their offense is electric. I have so much fun watching the Oilers, and I'm excited to see them in the playoffs moving forward. Hockey is fun. It's electric as a whole. I'm really excited to find out about it. I'm excited to learn more about this sport and about this league as we roll into the playoffs. There's lots of teams that are easy to root for. Toronto's fan base, easy to root for. Edmonton's offense, fun to watch, easy to root for that reason. Alex Ovechkin, easy to root for. A lot of easy to root for franchises in the Stanley Cup, in the NHL rather, in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Very excited to watch that play out. All right, our top 5 plus 1 in the MLB. I'm also learning more about baseball. I haven't watched baseball very thoroughly my whole life, but I'm getting into it. The league is very cloudy right now in the MLB. There's under 15 games played. The division standings are all jacked up. The records aren't quite clear. Strength of schedule imbalance is very strong. But I have what I would consider to be what I did my best, right, on this top 5 plus 1 in the MLB. Number 1, I have the Philadelphia Phillies. There is very strong recency bias here. They took 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers last week. Give them props. They straight up beat the Dodgers 2 times out of 3. Sure, this was in Philly, but that was very encouraging. And it made me feel like maybe the Dodgers aren't the world beaters that we thought they were heading into this season, and maybe the Phillies have potential to come out of the NL. I feel like this baseball season already has way more parity than we thought it would, and I think that the Dodgers not being awesome, undefeated through 14 games, dominant as we thought they would be, is very encouraging as well. The NL is very good. The Dodgers, the NL West, their division is very good. And the Dodgers lost 2 out of 3 on the road against the Phillies. Obviously, the teams that we're seeing now are nothing like the teams that we will see when we get to the postseason. But the Dodgers, 2 straight series losses. They come in at number 2 in the power rankings, below the Phillies. They lost to the Phillies. They lost to the Nationals. The Dodgers are kind of struggling right now as they have some road games out there in the East. I believe they return home tonight to play the Cubs, which is a thrill in its own way. As obviously they swept the Cubs 2-0 in Tokyo recently. But the Dodgers are good. The Dodgers are obviously probably the best team in the league. But right now, power rankings, Philly took 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers. We put them at the top of the NL and the top of the MLB. Number 3 is another NL team. It's the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs have very strong strength of schedule and a 9-4 record through that. They have series wins over San Diego and Texas, who are, as you'll find out, number 4 and 5 in the power rankings here. The Cubs haven't lost a series all year, right? I think they're great. Wins over San Diego and Texas, very impressive, especially on the road. Number 4 is the Texas Rangers. They're the top AL team, and actually, now that I look at it, the only AL team that I have in the top 5. Recent World Series champs, they're clearly back at it again. The Rangers will be great if they stay healthy. They'll honestly probably be the 1 seed in the AL. They'll probably win the AL West, and they'll certainly have a chance to qualify for the ALCS and potentially more after that. I personally believe in the Red Sox, but they had a slow start. They, of course, don't make it onto the rankings. And then the Angels are my +1 in the MLB. Stay on guard about the Angels, right? They still have Mike Trout at the end of the day. They're 8-4. They haven't lost a series all year. They're half a game back from Texas in the AL West. They beat the White Sox. They beat the Cardinals. They beat the Guardians, and they beat the Rays. It's pretty good. I put the Angels in this slot instead of the Giants, just because the Angels had a stronger strength of schedule, in my opinion. Stay on guard about the Angels throughout the rest of April. See if some of these higher quality opponents potentially drop games to the Angels and potentially drop series to the Angels. I think we'll find out by the end of April whether or not the Angels have a chance of being legit or not. And I'm excited to see how that plays out, and I'm excited to see how the AL West standings continue to look, especially paired with the NL West, which is a crapshoot in its own right. The Angels are great. They're my +1. Watch the Angels. Keep them in mind. I think that's certainly the right move in the MLB. Baseball's in a very healthy place right now. There's a lot of parity, especially in the NL. I just listed 4 NL teams in the top 5 of the whole MLB. And one of those, 2 of those teams would be in 3-game series to start the playoffs. So the MLB is absolutely in a great spot right now, in my opinion, and I am very much enjoying watching it play out, and I look forward to the rest of the 150-something games that we have left in the season. All right, that was our top 5 +1. New segment. We're going to put it in every week so we can sort of keep an eye on all the teams that I find fascinating throughout the sports world. Let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts. We haven't talked about the Colts in a while. I want to get into position group rankings, right? I want to rank the position groups in Indianapolis. This sort of doubles as a draft needs segment, but I want to focus on the best position groups in Indianapolis. I feel that this time of year, we're so focused on the negatives. We're so focused on what our team lacks as we look to refill and reload that position group in the draft. I want to kind of focus on what's good in Indianapolis and what the ceiling of this team could be. We'll go top to bottom. The position groups that we're ranking here are quarterback, running back, offensive line, wide receiver and tight end go together. We'll call them pass catchers. And then the secondary, so cornerbacks and safeties, defensive line, and linebackers. Linebackers is sort of the most niche, specific position group that we have going on here, but I just couldn't quite bring myself to call it a front 7 and loop them in with the D-line. The number one position group in Indianapolis is, in my opinion, the pass catchers in wide receiver and tight ends. At wide receiver specifically, they've got Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, and then A.D. Mitchell, Ashton Dulin. It's an awesome group. I love the receivers in Indianapolis. And this group could get even better. We just re-signed Mo Alley Cox, if I'm not mistaken, just about an hour ago. But potentially the Colts could be grabbing Tyler Warren. They could be grabbing Colston Loveland right in the draft. That absolutely makes this pass catcher group, if you add a tight end, the best group on the roster, on the team. Now, the question is whether or not they have somebody to throw them the ball, and that's going to be something that we wait and see about, and we'll speak on that a bit later in the segment. Running back is the number 2 position for me. Jonathan Taylor is obviously great. We'll see what his future in Indianapolis looks like, but Jonathan Taylor is obviously awesome. Khalil Herbert, I think, was a very quality add in the offseason. I think that a lot of people forget about that. We, of course, acquire him from Chicago, a great running back number 2, and this, I think, solidified the idea that the Colts are not going to make a move for Ashton Genty or something outrageous. Maybe you see a Cam Scatabo draft later down the line in the later rounds, something like that. But Indianapolis, I don't think needs a running back. I think it's the number 2 position group in terms of depth and overall quality with Jonathan Taylor and Khalil Herbert. I'm very excited about that. And that sort of shapes up the idea that the offense, in terms of skill position players, is looking pretty good. And obviously, later down the list, we'll have offensive line and quarterback, which sort of provides the counteracting point in that way. Cornerback and safety is my number 3 position group in Indianapolis. They made some big-time moves, and I loved the add of Charvarius Ward and Cam Bynum in the offseason. And also with Lou Anarumo, we could potentially be seeing some more nifty, fascinating, intriguing, compelling defensive schemes, especially in the secondary, especially when it comes to pass defense. I love to see it. Lou Anarumo, when he had great players in Cincinnati, was great, and he led that defense to a Super Bowl just 2 years after having the number 1 pick in the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar greatness of defense and pass defense with Indianapolis and Lou Anarumo now that we have given the Colts and now that we've given Anarumo great talent in pass coverages with Bynum and Charvarius Ward. We stole Anarumo. We really did. I cannot believe the Bengals fired him. The story there is really Anarumo's awesome with an awesome defense, and then they go to the Super Bowl, and they lose, obviously, and then they lose all their defensive players, and obviously Anarumo struggles as defensive coordinator, and then they fire him, and now he's on the Indianapolis Colts, and the Indianapolis Colts have given him great players. We potentially see a Super Bowl caliber defense performance with Lou Anarumo, which I'm thrilled by. That's paired with a number 4 on the roster defensive line group, in my opinion. It's a star-studded D-line, even without making a move for Myles Garrett, right? You've got Kwity Paye, you've got Grover Stewart, you've got DeForest Buckner, you've got Samson Ebukam, right? This is a defensive line that I think is incredible. I really like it. And by the way, Myles Garrett, I don't think the Colts needed to or really even should have wanted to make a move for Myles Garrett. I think it would have been expensive, it would have been complicated, and this group is already great. But it's worth mentioning, right? Even without Myles Garrett or adding any pieces in the offseason, at least so far on the defensive line, Kwity Paye, Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, Samson Ebukam, group's awesome. Love the defensive line. They're number 4 on the roster. And now you sort of start to slip into the position groups that I think are a bit less awesome. Quarterback, the most prominent of them. This is a major question mark, right? It's a cornerstone of the roster, but still very unclear. It's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, right? And I don't like that we have both of them. I talked at length about this on a recent show, that I'm interested to see the development between the two of them, but I'm hesitant about the idea to add Daniel Jones to the roster. I think that this has to be the last season of Anthony Richardson if he struggles, but we have to give him full control, right? If this season goes off the rails under Anthony Richardson, then we know that Anthony Richardson is the guy that obviously needs to lead the program, right? He's not the quarterback that we're looking for to win a Super Bowl with. If this season, if we put all our eggs in the basket of Anthony Richardson and it goes off the rails, at least we are absolutely sure that Anthony Richardson is not the guy. But bringing in Daniel Jones, I think, makes things complicated. And while I understand the idea that potentially increasing competition for Anthony Richardson is a good thing, I don't like that Daniel Jones potentially on a 1-year deal, if Anthony Richardson starts the year and then, or if Daniel Jones starts the year and then struggles, Anthony Richardson steps in and the Colts miss the playoffs by a game, and we don't fully know where to place the blame. If the blame's distributed between Jones and Richardson and potentially some other factors as well, then we don't really know where to move forward with Anthony Richardson or with Daniel Jones, with both, with neither. We really don't know what to do. I want to put all the eggs in the basket of Anthony Richardson and see where it goes. And if it succeeds, great. If it fails, then we know exactly what to do in the next offseason. After we made the decision to keep Anthony Richardson around for one more year, I think that's the best decision. And clearly the Colts disagree, and that's a question mark for me. I don't love it. I don't think either one is accurate enough or has a strong enough arm or is a strong enough of a presence in the locker room. I don't think that either one of these quarterbacks have everything that we want them to have. And if someone does, I think it's Anthony Richardson, and that's why it frustrates me that we're not going all in on him right now. That's just my opinion. Quarterback is, in my opinion, the fifth best position group out of these 7. Linebacker is next. We obviously let E.J. Speed walk. It's now Zaire Franklin and Jalen Carley's. I think that linebacker position a little bit weak, maybe. Not quite enough depth, maybe not quite enough experience there. We'd love to see an ad at linebacker moving forward throughout the rest of the offseason. And the offensive line has a lot of questions. We obviously have the Braden Smith story, which was very sad and very, very important to read, I suppose. We see Will Fries walk. We see Wesley French walk, right? There's major concerns about the offensive line to me, even with Quentin Nelson, and I don't think that's being talked about enough. So in the draft, right, we'd love to see a tight end, but honestly, in some ways more than that, we'd love to see some offensive line play. We'd love to see some linebacker depth. Other than that, I think this is a playoff roster if the quarterback position pans out, and that's, of course, the primary issue in Indianapolis at the moment is the question of whether or not the quarterback position is going to pan out. But those are my rankings. We got wide receiver, tight ends, running back. We have secondary, and then D-line, quarterback, and then, of course, rounding it out, we've got linebacker and offensive line. Let's transition now to our last segment of the day about the Western Conference of the NBA. We're flipping back to basketball, back to the NBA. In the last couple of months and the last couple of weeks, the Western Conference has completely exploded in on itself, right? Every team in the top 8 has had legitimate hopes to win multiple playoff series at least at one point this year, whether it's right now or whether it was in the past. But we've seen a complete rearranging of the conference, and to sort of illustrate how this conference has completely exploded, the Thunder have held strong, the Rockets have held strong, but other than that, the Lakers traded for Luka Doncic, the Mavs traded away Luka Doncic, right? Denver and Memphis both fired their coaches in the last couple weeks of the season. The Clippers were injured, but now get Kawhi back and are a scary threat as well. Golden State went out and got Jimmy Butler. They're potentially ramping up to succeed after being in the play-in range earlier on in the year. The standings are all messy, right? It's still, to this day, with 2 days left in the regular season, 3 days left in the regular season, there's 4 or 5 teams that could be 6 teams that could be in the play-in tournament, different teams that could be in that 7-8 game, and different teams that could be the 4 seed and have home court advantage in the playoffs. It is completely bonkers what's going on in the Western Conference right now. And somebody has to go to the finals, right? So the question is, who is it going to be? And that's the question we're going to answer right now is, who's coming out of the Western Conference and who has a chance to? I think that the front runners, I have 3 categories here. I have the front runners, the teams trending up, and the teams free falling. We're going to go over these categories, and then I'm going to give you the number 1 team that I think could actually do it. The front runners, of course, you have the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're young, they're fun, they're electric. Their biggest flaw is that they're young and that they're inexperienced and that they haven't made a conference finals yet, right? They haven't gotten there yet. They lost to the Mavs last year as a 1 seed in the conference semifinals. So Oklahoma City, great team, young, fun, clearly the best in the league, best record in the league, no doubt about it. There's no reason to doubt them in that way. However, once you get to the playoffs, this is still a young and inexperienced team with, leaders in Shea and Jalen Williams and some of these other guys that we're unsure about when they're in big-time moments in the postseason because we haven't seen them have true dominant success in those moments yet. OKC is great. That's their one flaw, inexperience. Los Angeles, the Lakers, I also think they are a front runner. They are awesome. They have a well-built roster. They have star power. Their biggest flaw is really, I think, how new the roster is, throwing Luka in, and I think they're acclimating. I think they're figuring it out, but they haven't had a playoff series with Luka yet, right? They haven't had to experience that. Luka hasn't been on a team where the number 1 guy is LeBron James, right? He hasn't been on a team where he's not the number 1 guy. That's interesting. That's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? The blessing is that your number 2 scorer is Luka Doncic, and the curse is that you have 2 number 1 scorers on your team, right? It could be a bit tricky for the Lakers, especially in a West that is very, very, very good, top to bottom. And they also kind of have a lack of a true big. I think Jackson Hayes is better than people think. I think he's better than people realize. But the Lakers, I don't think necessarily are prepared to bash and bang between the blocks with those forwards, with those centers, as maybe some other teams are. And then my third front runner is the Golden State Warriors. They're very well built. They're now healthy. Kuminga is back. Jimmy Butler is on this team. He's fitting in perfectly. The biggest flaw for me with Golden State is their individual inconsistencies at times, right? Draymond Green, night after night, a bit inconsistent. Jonathan Kuminga, now that he's back from injury, we don't really know what he's going to be. Curry's great, always. Butler usually is great, right? The Warriors are great. There's no doubt about it. But I worry that some of these individual inconsistencies might shine through in big moments in a Game 6, Game 5, Game 7 situation. That worries me about the Warriors. But for the most part, there's a reason why those are the only three teams that I have in the front runners category. If someone's coming out of the West, in my opinion, it's going to be OKC, LA, or Golden State. We have a few teams that are trending up. Houston's a 2 seed. I don't believe in them. I think they're a weak and unstable 2 seed. They might get upset in the first round. I don't have faith in them, but maybe I should, right? I think they're a star player away from really being a true title contender. I don't consider them a title contender, despite them being, of course, the number 2 seed in the West. But they're trending up, and they have potential to have success. The Clippers, another good one. A talented roster. They're 8-2 in the last 10. They're a scary first-round opponent for whoever has to catch them. And if it's Denver or Memphis, then all of a sudden you're having very different conversations about your playoff hopes. Minnesota is the next one. Anthony Edwards, we know what he's like in the playoffs. He's got some upset potential as well as a team that probably is going to be in the play-in, probably is going to be the 7 seed. I hesitate to use the word probably in that way because 2 games left to go and everyone's separated by 2 games or less, it feels like. Minnesota's a team that's trending up and has potential to have success. And then Denver is the first team that I have that's free-falling. Jamal Murray has been out. The defense has been struggling. They just fired their coach. They will get Jamal Murray back. But this is a team that has a good supporting cast, an MVP potentially on the roster in Nikola Jokic. Great roster with Murray. Can they pull it together, right? If the Nuggets aren't playing someone hot, if the Nuggets are playing the Grizzlies, it's a new conversation, even if they're honestly playing the Rockets. But the way the standings are going to shake out, I feel like the Nuggets are bound to have a difficult opponent, whether the 4 seed and they play the Clippers or they're the 3 and they play the Warriors, the Timberwolves. The Nuggets are going to have a tough time, in my opinion, no matter what. And that's why I think they're going to lose first round just because of all the chaos going on within that franchise and within that organization. Denver's free-falling. Obviously, they're still great. They have the best player in the league probably on their team. They have a great supporting cast. It's a very well-built roster and one that I considered a championship contender all the way up until a couple days ago and a couple weeks ago as they began to fall off the rails and lose games multiple times in a row. Memphis is the true free-falling team. I think they'll be the 8 seed. They might not even make the playoffs, honestly. They might be a play-in team. I don't have Sacramento or Dallas in these lists because I just don't think they're really worth mentioning. I like Sacramento a lot. Obviously, I don't like Dallas, but you know, Sacramento could beat Memphis in the play-in and be the 8 seed, and I wouldn't be shocked at all. They fired their coach as well. There's some discussion that maybe Ja Morant had something to do with that. Ja Morant plays very inconsistently as well. They have a good supporting cast, but I just don't know if the foundation of the Memphis Grizzlies is very strong. I think that their house is very well built on the foundation of Ja Morant and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. and whatever their coaching situation is. I just don't know if this is I don't know if this is what Memphis is going to be if they're going to win a championship. I don't know if it's going to happen with Ja. And I don't think it's going to happen this year. I think Memphis is the most likely team to fall out of the playoffs entirely out of these 8, honestly. When you look at the play-in tournament, Memphis absolutely could lose to Sacramento and struggle from there. So Memphis is a team that's free-falling, but across the board, you've got 3 front-runners, OKC, LA, and Golden State. You've got Houston, LA, the Clippers, and Minnesota that are sort of in the mix. And then Denver and Memphis, I just think have no chance to win 3 playoff series in this Western Conference. Anything really can happen, though. In my mind, it's OKC, LA, or Golden State. Houston's got an outside shot. Most teams are just there to play spoiler. This will be a whole lot of fun in the Western Conference. If I were to pick one team to go all the way, I honestly think it's the Los Angeles Lakers, which I'm hesitant to say right now. But LeBron, Luka Doncic, already awesome. And then Austin Reeves, I think, is one of the best, third scorer option in the league. Jackson Hayes is better than people think. Rui Hachimura goes underappreciated, right? I think the Lakers have a lot of upside on this team. And while the Thunder are a little bit young, they're a bit inexperienced, they might need one more failure before they turn around and go win it all the next year, something like that. The Warriors, I think, are great too. They have a great chance. I just think LeBron is aging better than Steph is, maybe. So Lakers, Celtics, right? That could be the chance. That could be the NBA Finals, and that would be awesome. Obviously, that's two major brands, which is controversial in its own way. But it's the Lakers, the Thunder, or the Warriors to me. I think it would be the Lakers, probably, honestly, as my number one choice to win the West. But the Western Conference is wild, right? It is no doubt a wild, wild West, and I'm very excited to watch it all play out. That is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. We're going a little bit over an hour here, about an hour 5, but this is about where I thought this episode was going to end up by the end of it. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast. We should be back next Friday evening on April 18th for another show. Again, thank you so much for listening. We talk about the Pacers, talk about the Colts, we talk about college basketball, we talked a lot about the NBA, got some MLB and NHL in there. Jam-packed show. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. I will see you all again next week.